Welcome back, guys. We all know someone who is always out to get a quick buck, but always fails. You know, the type of guy who tried to get you into Forex trading or drop sharing. Well, for the select few with big enough brains, getting quick cash sometimes works, especially if you have luck on your side and you're crazy enough. In history, that someone goes by the name Victor Lustig. Victor was born in modern day Austria in 1890, and from a young age, everything came pretty easy to him, except for money. He cruised his way through school, which turned out to be the beginning of the greatest con man's backstory. Victor was no ordinary man. School didn't satisfy his need for thrill, so he did what anyone seeking for thrill would do and became a gambling addict. The problem with gambling is that it can be incredibly addicting, and Victor was hooked. So he dropped out of school. But since losing all your money gambling can be pretty expensive, Victor had to figure out how to make more money. He quickly found out he had a knack for panhandling and pickpocketing, which he would do to support his vice. After dropping out of school and figuring out the fast money from gambling wasn't sticking around for long, Victor had to find a new way to sustain himself, and a life of crime, cons, and illegal activity was his choice. Victor basically lived on ferries for a period of time, scamming the occasional guests, but one day he decided to turn his cons up a notch. He posed as a Broadway producer on the ferry and found a group of rich-looking individuals. He then managed to convince them that he was working on a big piece for Broadway and was looking for investors. He managed to con them into giving him money, and just like that, Victor was never seen by the men again. However, after some time on the ferries conning people out of their money, World War I started brewing in Europe, and Victor decided that New York would be a better place to scam people, since most people in a continental war wouldn't have much. The first thing he got up to in New York? Conning a bank into giving him money for the bonds on a repossessed property. But Victor used sleight of hand and left the bank with both the bonds and the money. After some time in New York, Victor had stacked up a small fortune from his cons, so he decided to treat himself to a trip back to France. While staying in Paris, he read a newspaper article which was talking about the problems with maintaining the Eiffel Tower, which gave Victor the inspiration any con man was looking for, a new con. To sell the literal Eiffel Tower, the giant building in the middle of Paris, Victor forged fake government papers and posed as a government official and invited all metal scrap dealers in the city to a top-secret meeting. Once gathered, he claimed that since the Eiffel Tower had become very unpopular by the people, the government planned to demolish it and they would be willing to sell the metal to the highest bidder. But he also made all the scrap metal dealers keep it secret, as he told them if the public found out, there would be too much of an outcry. After the meeting, a man named Poisson attempted to bribe Victor in order to secure the Eiffel Tower. Victor took the bribe of what today is $5 million and immediately fled the country back to Austria. Victor was laying low in Austria for a while and regularly checking the newspaper to see if any story broke out about a con to sell the Eiffel Tower. But week after week, nothing. Until it finally hit Victor. Poisson was literally too embarrassed to tell anyone, since he had paid a bribe in order to win the rights to the Eiffel Tower, meaning a police report was never filed and nobody knew. Victor realized he had essentially pocketed $5 million with no consequences. So, as any true con man would do, Victor returned to Paris to try the scam again. However, this time the scrap metal dealers were a bit wiser than Poisson and quickly realized they were being scammed and reported to the police, which opens up the next chapter of Victor's escapades, because on the note of being one of the most wanted men in Paris, he escaped to the US to evade arrest. What's the first thing you get up to in a new continent after barely avoiding jail because you tried to sell the Eiffel Tower 2 times? Another con, of course. Considering Victor had $5 million from his previous con, I couldn't imagine he was in desperate need of cash. But nonetheless, he decided to get at with his new scam, which he named the Money Box. He claimed this box could duplicate any currency bills that were inserted into it, with the only catch being the box needed 6 hours to print an identical copy. Victor would go around with the money box convincing people that it worked by taking the notes it printed to the bank and authenticating the notes. But in reality, He would carry an extra real note with him, making it pretty simple to con people into thinking it truly worked. People would be so desperate for this box, but Victor would pretend there was no way he would sell it until he was offered an absurd amount of money for it. However, one day after committing a much smaller and petty con, Victor let his guard down and was jailed for it. But as any con man would do, Victor spent the night in jail talking the sheriff's ear off about his money box, believing the sheriff would free him in exchange for the money box. Eventually, at one point, the sheriff realized the money box was fake. The sheriff would chase Victor across the country until he eventually caught him in Chicago, where Victor once again managed to convince the sheriff he was actually just using the box wrong by stuffing the box with fake bills and showing the sheriff. After all that, he managed to simply talk the sheriff into believing he was just using the box wrong. He then just turned and left, fully thinking the box would work when he got home, only for the sheriff to be arrested for using counterfeit bills. While in Chicago, Victor met a man by the name of Al Capone, the biggest gangster in American history. And what did Victor do? Devise a plan to con Al Capone out of a massive sum of money. He made up a business plan, sold the idea to Al Capone, loaned a bunch of money, but instead of spending it, he would lock it away for 2 months, return to Al Capone with the money, telling him his plans had fallen through. Al Capone, being impressed with Victor's honesty, gave Victor a chunk of the money, exactly as Victor had predicted would happen. But before Al Capone would ever realize what would happen, Victor would be turned into the authorities by his longtime mistress, who had figured out the con man was conning her as well. When arrested by the police, they found a key on Victor, which opened a locker in the Times Square subway station filled with $1.5 million in today's money. Despite managing to actually escape the prison, Victor was arrested just 3 weeks later and sent to Alcatraz, where he would spend the rest of his life locked away. And that, everyone, is the story of Victor Lustig, the man who sold the Eiffel Tower twice and conned his way through 2 continents. I hope you enjoyed this video and see you next time.